Hello there. I'm Tom Colley, the creator and performer of Spectrum Revisited. You are about to watch one of the most recent iterations of it. It has continued to grow and change since I first started it almost 5 years ago, and I keep building on it even now. I dedicate this show to my fellow beautiful people all over the spectrum. Never give up. Never be ashamed of who you are and live your best life on your terms. Thank you.
Before we get started, an important disclaimer. I'm an actor first, a singer second, and a guitarist last. What's in a first impression? What's the first thing that you see? Do you see the full picture? Well, not necessarily. Just look a little closer, and you'll see past the disguise. Let the mask be pulled back, and you might just be surprised. How does my brain work? Why does it just randomly go off on the fritz? Why can't it stay put? You start a finding Dan and comes a sudden blitz between the eyes. Out of nowhere, I'm running on fumes. Next acting gig is months away, feeling gloom and doom. No theater outlet had me feeling unhinged, so I put myself out there, going to the fringe. Now it shouldn't matter that I've never done a solo show and have nothing prepared. Why do they need to know? I'd be one of dozens rearing to submit. So what's the chance of me being picked? Oh, shit. Dozens of ideas have been bouncing around my head, and then eureka, a nagging question just had to be said. Just how does my brain work? If you don't fit in a bunch, why would you even try? It's worth the effort. Or will people brush it off as sounding only preachy and unwise? Few months later, somehow up on its feet, I'll cram down a big box on stage, never feels complete. Revive the next spring, further polish and flair, but still felt wrong and emotionally raw to bear. I put it to the side, hey, it's got a good run. Being all profound is fine, but try to have some fun. Abstract artsy dancing only gets the point so far, and with no condition to go with it. Are there any real reasons to go back to that sorry tale? Especially when revelations would one day tell. Just how does my brain work? There'd be better answers only further down the road with the new input. These unexpected unearthers can find the missing pieces of the whole. And also, another little disclaimer. At the end of the day, I'm just an entertainer. Please do not let me be your only education. I've put some wonderful resources in the program, and also organizations that deserve your support. Not Autism Speaks! Also, while I try to keep this as uplifting as possible, with goofy impressions and parody songs, we're discussing dark subject matter. We're talking about eugenics, child abuse, medical abuse, and ableism. But if you stick with it, I promise it'll be worth it in the end. Also, there'll be a lot of swearing. You'll also want to swear as well, that wouldn't go too far. No matter how I try, it winds up rated R. Ableism's history has many twisted bonds with many nagging voices that wants mute or gone. How does my brain work? I could keep on asking or finally start the show. Lift back the curtain and get ready for this short time. Ready, set, and here we go. Yeah!
I had a therapist that I saw from my late elementary years up until my late 20s. And at some point in my early 20s, she very kind of casually was just like, so have you ever considered that you might be on the autism spectrum? And it turned out that she had thought this for many, many years and just kind of waited until she thought that I might be receptive to that.
I was in high school, probably like 15 or 16 when I kind of like, it clicked with me that like I was just having a conversation with my mom in the kitchen and she just kind of brought it up, and that's my first memory of like talking about it.
I was diagnosed when I was, I believe, 22. Yeah. By a military doctor of all things, which I would not expect to get a proper diagnosis from a military doctor.
I initially self-diagnosed in 2020, actually, and then I found a PDF from some website I don't remember the name of, where a woman had compiled a list of traits of women with Asperger's. And reading that PDF, I realized, like, okay, it's different in women, right? You know, it's different for everybody. You know, there's a whole lot we don't know about it. And
when I was 31 in 2016, however, I don't think I really fully understood it or even really accepted it. Probably until a couple of years ago when I was probably, I think, 35. It took quite a while for it to really sink in, and also for me to see myself in the diagnosis as a woman who is autistic.
But just all of those little puzzle pieces, for lack of a better word, I know that's a sensitive term in our community, but they all came together, and all of these tiny little occurrences suddenly made sense, and I had a name for them, and I had an explanation for them, and it wasn't just that my brain was weird.
yeah, I think I kind of understood what it meant for me before I, was able to like say for sure, I think I'm autistic. I think I was realizing like all of these things fit together, under this label of autism, was very exciting.
I think mostly when I was a teenager, I started to know what it really meant to be autistic.
So I think I've kind of been able to progress with it as it's gone on, which has been really nice.
Eventually kind of came around to accepting it, and not even just accepting it, but embracing it.
Before we get ahead of ourselves with the plot twist that is the story of my life, let's talk about a brief history of autism and its complicated relationship with psychological medicine. Psychiatry as a whole is really young, if you think about it. Other medical areas have had centuries to start figuring out what germs are, what organs do what, that draining people's blood doesn't heal them, that washing your hands is a good idea, actually. But having a doctor for not just your brain, but your mind, barely more than a century. And autism in that, well, fasten your seatbelts. My name is Eugene Bloller, Swiss shrink and humanist. In 1911, I first coined the term autism, from the Greek autos for self and the English ism for ism, or state of being, for the way they tend to be withdrawn within themselves. I was also an early researcher in schizophrenia, and it was my professional opinion that autistic people are a form of emotionally withdrawn schizophrenic. Interesting take, but not the worst starting off point. Let's not forget this is the same time as when Freud was going on about his ideas of hypnosis and Oedipus complex and penis envy. The 1920s began the exploration of electroconvulsive therapy as a treatment for conditions, including autism. Let's just say it's a treatment that is still used, but it has become a lot more ethically applied and safer. I'm Dr. Leo Kana. In 1943, I made discoveries that clarified autism as a social and emotional disorder, additionally creating early diagnosis for infants and toddlers. But I could not have been able to do this alone. Dr. Gronya Efanovna Sukarevia had been making great headway in her native Russia the prior decades. She really was ahead of us in so many ways. And how could I forget my Austrian contemporary, who probably established it as a communication disorder, and whose research became a cornerstone to our popular understanding of the condition, Dr. Hans Asperger. We'll get back to him in a bit. In the 1950s, I came along, Bruno Bentelheim. I pioneered refrigerator mother syndrome. What's that? I'm so glad you asked. You see, from my in-depth observations, the reason autistic children are autistic, it is the mother's fault for not loving them enough. My recommended treatment, a parentectomy, completely severing ties with the caregiver. Sorry, don't know how that got there. Moving on. Yes, we need to rewind the clock a little bit. I am Dr. Edward Thorndike. I create the psychological methodology of law of approach, also known as instrumental learning. Oh, don't bore them with all that boring gobbledygook. Dr. John B. Watson at your service. While he was going on about law of approach and puzzle boxes, I had long before published the piece Psychiatry as the Behavioralist Views It. Oh, don't make me laugh with your petty laurels. My work stands alongside Pavlov for saying the groundwork for behavioralism. Oh, please! You completely contradicted your own findings in 1929. Everybody knows your entire methodology is a joke. How dare you, sir? How dare you, sir? Gentlemen, you're both important. I am Dr. B.F. Skinner. Based on their work, I put together what was called operant conditioning, which later influenced in the 1990s applied behavioral analysis, which I understand is now the gold standard for autism treatment. Unfortunately, during my time, one of my pupils, Matthew Israel, took my methods and incorporated shock aversion therapy. This is not the same as electroconvulsive therapy, which is a low, controlled voltage under general anesthetic with informed consent and only as a last resort. This is strapping a person to a large battery with electrodes to their arms and their legs, where inflicting pain is the entire point. Like a shock collar for a dog. After all, if you can shock and scare a dog into not peeing on the rug or staying in the yard, why not apply that logic to children and zap the undesirable ticks out of them? It also causes second-degree burns. Any changes in behavior usually go away once the treatment ends, and usually all that's left is higher rates of self-harm, substance abuse, and a drastically increased mistrust in any sort of authority figure. If you're wondering, yes, this was also back when being gay or transgender was also considered a mental disorder. In fact, its creators had a direct hand in pioneering conversion therapy as well. It turns out, every time I've had to go back to this part of the script, I've had to update it because shock aversion therapy is still used on disabled children, specifically at the Judge Rotenberg Center in Massachusetts, often court ordered to this day. In 2021, a federal court overturned the FDA's attempt to ban the practice. But in January of 2023, Congress passed an appropriations bill which should, in theory, strengthen the FDA's authority in instituting a ban. The JR Institute will probably find some other bullshit way of legally challenging it again, but still, there's hope. But back to ethical science. A few decades later, autistic Dr. Temple Grandin incorporated her ideas on how livestock were calmed to create the hug machine, an idea of applying gentle pressure to help ease the symptoms of overstimulation, and still used by many treatment centers across the country. In 1977, Susan Folstein and Michael Rudder published their twin study, showing the strongest evidence yet that autism's main cause was most likely hereditary, not environmental, causing everyone to have a thorough reevaluation, is what I would like to say. If only people's common misconceptions kept up with the science. Still, progress. Also, along came a Frenchman. Guy Barrage created auditory integration therapy as a method of helping to understand and treat overstimulation, less making them conform and more of what they need. Très bon. By the 1980s, all the different studies and research had begun to be put together and streamlined under the third edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illnesses. But that's a bunch of boring sciencey words, so I like to use its abbreviation because it sounds like a video game power-up. DSM-3 added into the roster specific diagnostic criteria. Then into the 90s, more and more schools began creating special education programs and individualized education programs. IEP, all further coalesced under the DSM-4. The DSM-4 also created a variety of development disorder diagnoses: Asperger's, high functioning, low functioning, PDD, and OS. It's not their fault that there were still huge steps up ahead, and kids who are in one category didn't always cleanly translate into the next. Or, more accurately, parents can't be expected to keep up with every single medical textbook.
Keep this in mind. This is going to be important later.
Finally, in 2013, we got the DSM-5. The known factors and studies streamlined into a single condition: autism spectrum disorder, with patients categorized from levels verbal to nonverbal to explain communication difficulties, and level 1 to 3 to determine how much outside care they need throughout their life. And no more subcategories like PDD and OS, childhood disintegrative disorder, high functioning, low functioning, and no more Asperger's. Thank goodness. And now that I've mentioned his name again, I think it's about time we really went back and talked about Dr. Hans Asperger. For the briefest of summaries, he studied and worked in Vienna, the go-to place for advancing psychiatric research. He specialized in the emerging field of special education. The thing he is most famous for is noticing how certain autistic kids were able to develop hyper-specific talents that could be nurtured into successful careers. And at first glance, this makes sense. One of his charges grew up to be an accomplished astronomer, another a Nobel Prize-winning writer. But in recent years, some concerning revelations have come up around him. Specifically, his association with okay, hang on. Let's not get too carried away. Nuance is a thing. So let's take a deep breath and really ask the question, was he really a Nazi? Short answer, no. He was never an official member of the Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party. I mean, Jesus, everyone you disagree with a Nazi. Longer answer, it's because he was already a longtime member of the Austrian Fascist Party, Fatherland Front. We tend to forget that Nazis weren't the only fascists back then. Or since then. Don't know how the Proud Boys got there. You didn't have to be a Nazi to work with them. And he was a very willing collaborator once they came into power. There's also one other thing that both he and the Nazis were a fan of: eugenics. Asperger's research was specifically for the goal of determining whether an autistic person was high functioning enough to be a productive member of the workforce and the community, or if they were, by his standards, unfit, or as Hitler liked to call them, useless eaters, and thus be eligible for his T-born euthanasia program. I have no doubt him shining a light on those gifted kids of his probably saved many of their lives. It's what his defenders love to point out. But what about the many more under his care who didn't meet this insanely high threshold? He personally sent them off to the Nazi-run Spiegelbrunn Psychiatric Hospital, which he had close professional ties with. They were subjected to horrific abuse and medical torture, and once their usefulness as lab rats came to an end, they were euthanized or were allowed to starve to death, with records forced to say it was pneumonia or accidents. 789 children died in that hellhole. Their brains were kept in jars in the laboratories until 2001. And even for the ones worthy in his research, he didn't exactly depict them in the highest regard. Now we remember his name for the condition named after him. But that didn't happen until long after he died. The official name he had for them was autistic psychopath. A lack of empathy, little ability to form friendships, one-sided conversations, intense absorption in special interests, and clumsy movements. And his thoughts about autism in general? Unfortunately, in the majority of cases, the positive aspects of autism do not outweigh the negative ones. That was one of the tamer quotes of his I could find. And he was saying bullshit like that long after the Nazis came around. So here's my question. Was he really a singular pioneer and trailblazer in the field of autism research? Or was he more likely a plagiarizing, self-serving eugenicist, willing to ingratiate himself with genocidal ethno-nationalists at the expense of the neurodivergent children under his care, and whose real legacy is sowing decades of confusion in autism's professional study, as well as our pop cultural misunderstandings about the condition, and popularizing the idea that the only worthwhile neurodivergent is a savant? I honestly don't know. On the one hand, I've always hated the product of their time argument. It erases the pain from those who suffered in those times, and also acts like there weren't people in those times who actively opposed it. But in the end, there are so many gaps in his history We just probably won't know what kind of man he was compared to the other more high-profile, controversial figures, and how much of it was him or more the corrupted structures that enabled and rewarded it. But for better or worse, he's a part of history. And I think that deserves a song. There we go. You were a man of science, much knowledge did you seek. You sought to understand divergent minds that were unique. You showed to all the world their brilliance ne'er unseen. Now questions rise, were you those children's hero or a fiend? But we're all complicated, chance to do both bad and good. So seeing the full picture, all considering I would say you're still a piece of shit. I hope you burn in hell always. A fine young lad, a Paustum eldest child and golden son, such a love of language, poems, and referring to himself in the third person. This patriotic boy was molded by the German youth movement. Don't think about what time this was, just good on national spirit. Then off to Vienna with Asperger, where he met Doc Franz Hamburger. Franz taught Hans the ropes and became like Hans's father. Asperger and Hamburger soon became thick as thieves. Asperger thinks Hamburger gets his degree then leaves. You think this bit's too long? Well, too bad, don't waste your time. Hey, it's not my fault that both the first and last names rhyme. Hans, your journey went to shit. You wound up just an aimless dick. Your blundering led to children suffering. Fuck you, Hans. His star had grown and shone like you would not believe. A wife and fine young children, such happiness achieved. His reputation grew to an unmatched pedigree. But who was right next door? Oh dear, here comes the Nazis! Now Hitler's in town and Asperger saw where the wind now blew. His research probably shifting to appease the fascist crew. He then zeroed in on his specials for all eyes and said, hey, they are gifted, no need to euthanize. Now Hans don't mean to be a pill, too thin-skinned or judgy. If this was for all the disabled, why no girls in your studies? He thought women couldn't be autistic. What a guy! Hans, it could have gone so well, but geez, then it all went to hell. He'll gain fame through their pain, oh fuck you, Hans. The Nazis came and went, and you wandered on unscathed. Awards and commendation, and then peaceful to your grave. Your name did briefly fade, then your research was unearthed. With some questionable translating, a new legacy was birthed. Now I don't blame you all for not knowing about this tool. And some still call themselves Aspergers. That's cool. We can't all have this random encyclopedic knowledge. To truly comprehend the shit, it takes its own degree from college. I don't expect one song to change all people's minds. The rhymes were lame, and 3 short verses. Not nearly enough to unwind. He's still not off the hook. Hans, I try to be polite, but what you did, it wasn't right. Throughout your work, your peers, you shirked. Like plagiarizing Connor, overshadowing Sukaravia, When Jewish peers fed for their lives that boosted your career, you kept insisting that environments where ASD souls start. Try fewer pats on your own back and try growing a heart. Feign moral indignation, post World War II all day. That you oppose the Nazis' views, your notes a different story says it's not too much to ask. You just weren't up to task to value every child's life and not just ones you gave a pass. If ignorance or apathy, the damage done is plain to see. Fuck you, Hans! But that's just my opinion. Fuck you, Hans. How does my brain work? Interesting, but really what's it got to do with me? That's all for Act 2. We'll be back in 10 minutes and go into my life story. Intermission.
Empathy. So many people have this idea that autistic folks either don't have empathy, we just don't possess it, or that we can't express it, or things along that line. And to me, I'm completely the opposite. And then I realized that like most people don't need to build a database and don't need to study things like they're a football player watching the game from last week over and over again to see what went wrong and what they can do better and how to anticipate things. That comes naturally to folks who are neurotypical. But the vast majority of autistic people I know have done the same thing that I have, which is teach ourselves that, learn that. And it's a huge bummer that there are so many folks out there who hear someone is autistic and just automatically assume they're, going to be checked out. They're going to be an automaton. They don't have empathy, so they aren't going to return any feelings that you might give to them in a social setting. And it's just absolutely not true.
And I don't know if this is true for everyone, but a change in routine. Myself, I am very routine oriented. Sudden changes in what you plan on doing in the day can be really hard for me to deal with.
For me specifically, one thing that I feel is my natural just brain rhythm. I feel like I'm always kind of got that hamster on the wheel trying to catch up with the pace that society just naturally functions at. And while I feel like that's normally looked at as a downside because of the fact that it takes so much more mental focus and energy, I feel like it's also kind of a plus when it comes into situations that are considered very high anxiety, very high stress for neurotypical people.
Our point of view, we come at things from a bird's eye perspective. We like understanding why things are, why things happen, why something is done the way it is being done. And if it doesn't make sense to us, we will pick it apart, figure it out. And sometimes we can come to some unique solutions that would never occur to someone who is neurotypical. I think that is one of the ways that we contribute in such a positive way to society, is that our different point of view can lead to enormous breakthroughs that benefit everyone and of all neurotypes, and not just what is commonly accepted or popular.
Positive traits in general, people tend to ignore if somebody's not as verbal, or they're farther along on the spectrum. People tend to just not realize that there are incredible things happening inside the brain of anybody with autism, whether that's immediately visible to a neurotypical person or not. Whatever autism looks like for anybody, it's valuable. It's a good thing. It is really a vibrant example of somebody being differently abled.
Well, I was not your typical kid. I was quiet, more than just being a little shy. From what I understand, I really didn't start talking until I was almost 4. Other kids would meet a new person and be curious. If nervous, I could only remember being terrified. not knowing what to do, what was expected of me. I knew something was expected, but my brain just could not figure out what. So if there was a space where I could keep to myself, or if there was a pet to play with, that is where you would find me. There were these constant reminders that something was just a little bit off. And walking into preschool and then kindergarten, others kids rushed in with joy. Me, it would still be weeks before I wasn't hiding behind my mom every time she dropped me off. And then, apparently, this was the biggest red flag. Can you say hello, Tom? Hello, Tom. In hindsight, I sometimes wonder if they could have just as easily assumed I was being sarcastic. I'm not saying I did. I honestly don't remember, but it's a teacher's job to look out for possible warning signs like that, and I thank her for it. That is where the testing began. There was already this whole other show where we went through all about this, so here are the highlights. Sound check! So my hearing worked. That's cool. Interviews and shrinks. So many shrinks. And then the brain scan from hell, where they somehow expect a 5-year-old kid to nap with wires stuck to his head in a dark, scary hospital room. And later reading Pit and the Pendulum and thinking of it as the best allegory for the experience. The endless hopscotch between regular classes and special education. Delicious medication! That was my favorite part of the show. And then the late teen revelations of knowing exactly what an IEP is really about. With one teacher saying, "You've come such a long way." There was a point where they actually thought you were autistic. With that tone that they thought it would have been a bad thing if I was. But as far as they knew, I wasn't. And that was a good thing. I am sure she meant well, but wow. But that doesn't matter. It's off to college with some vague idea that there was something a little bit off, maybe still is, but that's okay. I was off on my own. I was going to train to be an actor. College was an experience. Eventually, by the time I became a senior, I finally built up the courage to talk to the university shrink. But by the end of our sessions, he just asked, "So, why are you here? What do you want me to help you with?" I couldn't answer. How exactly was I supposed to ask for help when I couldn't explain what it was because I just didn't know? Or in my final meeting with my advisor, the biggest advice was that I really needed to work on my people skills, but never being any more specific. I mean, I was connecting with roles much better. I had made friendships, honest to God connections I wanted to hold on to. What was it that they were seeing that I was still missing? So I just shelved it into the back drawer of my mind and tried to move forward. There's something a little bit weird about that little mind palace drawer. It keeps creaking. It won't close quite properly, so it would just wind up going open. And this metaphor is not going anywhere. I've never been good at metaphors. The point is, it didn't go away. This thing, this shadow. That's the best word for it because you can't get rid of a shadow or accidentally lose it like Peter Pan. maybe angle the light just right. Maybe people won't notice. Position yourself a certain way, and maybe it won't be noticed, but then you eventually have to move because you're a human being, not an automaton, and then it's just those "what is your deal" looks all over again. Just a constant reminder that there was just something that was missing from you in connecting with other people that other people just seem to take for granted. Overall, there were ups and downs. And eventually, things started coming together, if art and career wise, if not personally. Then this dangerous little virus came along, and we all had to drop everything and lock ourselves away. Now, it was just me and that shadow. I couldn't ignore it anymore, so I actually had to get to know it. The first part was the one I secretly dreaded the most. Let's set the scene. You're about to go to sleep. A night like any other, but something's just a little bit off. The sheets are just the way they always are, but now you notice every little bit of friction and rustling as it rubs up against your skin. The house always had those little creaks and groans, but when did they get so loud? The clock across the room is banging in my ears, and God help me if I open my eyes, because then everything looks all stretched out like a fisheye lens in a horror movie, and there's no way of telling how long this will be going. I just have to hope it go away as quick as possible. So this has been happening to me for as long as I can remember. When I was little, it usually just happened before I went to sleep, so I could just wait it out and hope the dreams or nightmares were better. Now, during lockdown, it started happening in the middle of the day while working, one time while I was driving. Now, I couldn't ignore it. I had to actually start figuring out, let's see. It happened during a period of low activity. It kicked off in moments of high stress, and there was no way to tell how long it would last. And it could be a few minutes, it could be a half hour, and there was no way to make it stop. In fact, the more you tried to make it stop, the longer it would last. It was like an itch you just could not scratch. So I took all this vague discomfort to the internet, asked half a dozen different ways, and just hope I got something other than homeopathy, essential oils, or another meditation app. Google can be your friend. You just need to know to ask the right questions. And eighth time's the charm. Hyperesthesia, an increased sensitivity to one or many of the five senses. Children with ADHD, OCD, and autism are more likely to develop hyperesthesia. Interesting. And there were many new revelations emerging with that. And most important, the introduction of new voices, neurodivergent voices, that talked about their own experiences, the greater variety of stuff that is never seen. How sensory and overstimulating issues make things simple as the type of fabric you're wearing, or even a shirt tag on the back of your neck, seem agonizingly distracting. I knew I wasn't crazy. It's the difficulties in making the appropriate facial expressions, be they too neutral or too extreme. One of the biggest early acting challenges I had was not looking like I was smiling all the time. Or the reason I hate watching myself on camera, which I am definitely looking forward to, is not knowing when I might get into my usual default bacon fish faced expression that made teachers made me kept telling me I need to stop wandering off to La La Land when I was trying to concentrate on what they were trying to say. Fifth grade was such a joy. The idiosyncratic ways that movement difficulties and coordination difficulties cabin, even something as simple as tying your shoelaces. The way an autistic person tends to hyper focus on the details of a problem and difficulty generalizing, switching between trains of thought or stimuli or social situations, and just visually processing the world. I just never understood how people were able to keep a conversation going in a crowded room. Because, yes, I could be having this amazing exchange with this person, but at the same time, there's this other conversation. Are they not also taking in every single little bit of word that's going on over here? It's, yes, I'm still here, but then there's also this music over here that's a great melody. And so, but then I'm still, yes, I'm still with you, but I'm processing. The way that rigid thinking actually works. It's about preference of routine, difficulty in understanding social rules and how they can change from moment to moment, individual to individual. And that change isn't impossible. It just takes a little more time and a little more constructive reasoning. Or the idea of literal thinking, creating that additional little barrier of needing the extra step to figure out what someone actually means. Getting in abstract concepts or metaphors or sarcasm. Or in my case, after all this time, I still don't understand why people like to say, we're laughing with you, not at you. I mean, I guess I get it. What I really don't understand is how exactly is it supposed to be comforting? I wasn't laughing. I had just said or done something embarrassing, and now I was embarrassed because I had gotten a laugh I did not want or ask for. Couldn't people say, it's all right, or don't be embarrassed, or you'll laugh at this someday? It seems more like something that they're trying to comfort themselves. And something that always made me scratch my head when people insisted I wasn't autistic because I had empathy. How does that even scan? The only medical professional that I could find who insisted on a lack of empathy being a part of ASD was that asshole I sang about earlier. Maybe it has to do with that nasty old first impression. This is a condition where the telltale symptoms are deficits in communication and social interaction. Does needing an abnormal approach to figuring out how to navigate them automatically mean that the person doesn't care about the people around them? A less known overlapping condition in autism is a difficulty in understanding and labeling our own emotions. So is it that there is no empathy or just an additional unnoticed barrier of properly showing it the way it's socially expected? It can actually translate as coming across as either apathy or hyper empathy, where you don't realize how much you are overdoing it depending on the autistic person. And the more I look back at some of my old interactions, there were a heck of a lot of moments where I just didn't get it. It took a while to figure out what I said or did wrong, or the proper way to navigate a situation with a new person and not accidentally hurt their feelings or understand how or why exactly what I did was wrong. I still wanted to do right by them. I cared even if it didn't show. But at the end of the day, how come I got an empathy pass when so many others didn't? Oh, but not to worry. There is a solution for all of that. Hi there! Are you having issues with your life? Specifically, other people having issues with you, with your little idiosyncratic words you can't quite help? Well, have I got a solution for you? Presenting masking! Why try to have some open communication, find some common ground where you can just put on a mask and boom! Out of sight, out of mind. Their mind specifically. We've got a mask for every occasion. People weirded out by your lack of eye contact? Well, voila! Yeah, just ignore the discomfort. You just keep powering through.
Side effects may include increased stress, anxiety, depression, and exhaustion.
Okay, well, it looks like that little physical tick that you have going is starting to come back. Well, you just need to put on this mask and boom! Now you have the most relaxed and confident air.
Side effects may include loss of identity. Some people who mask their identity, interests, and traits end up feeling that they no longer know who they really are.
Yeah.
Some have said masking feels like self-betrayal. Others have said masking makes them feel they're deceiving other people.
Just make sure you have to also put on this mask to cover up that other tick that started emerging when you started covering up that original tick.
Side effects may include
Yes.
risk of autistic
Well,
burnout.
it
When
looks
people
like
push themselves to
that
behave in
loud
ways that
music
don't
is being
feel
played
authentic.
that has
The result
that
can
one
be an
frequency that
overwhelming
really
feeling of
causes you to
overload,
overstim.
sometimes
Well,
called
don't
autistic burnout.
ask them
Masking
to
may require an
turn
extended
down the
period of
music.
quiet withdrawal and recovery.
Oh, there, or to go into another room. Just put on your mask of boom, pretending it's not there. Don't run risk shutting down. Oh, did we say shutting down? Oh, we can't have that. Well, make sure you have your mask of heavily planned out conversation points. Just make sure that the conversations don't veer too far off of it. All right, sorry. Just got this mask. Please use in moderation. Side effects include burnout, the things you're trying to cover up only getting worse, never feeling safe in a space or even in your own skin, and your self-esteem plummeting.
Everything, a lot of things that, people who are neurotypical do unconsciously, we have to do consciously. And it's a conscious effort, and it just takes a lot of energy. And it's something that is not reciprocated by those who are neurotypical. I think it should go both ways. I think people who are neurotypical should also learn how to communicate the way autistic people do as well, because it's not fair to place all the burden on autistic people and forcing us to mask and to expend enormous amounts of energy and time to learn this other communication style.
How I would say the thing that people don't see, so like usually when I'm like in the car driving home from work, I like just make noises and stuff and like sing little random songs I come up with in my head. And I never do that in public. Never. I'm just like, I can't, because it's so like, in society, it would be too weird. Like if I just started making random noises in front of people.
And I feel like because masking is a learnable behavior, a lot of neurotypical people see neurodivergents who are capable of masking and they go like, oh, see, you fixed yourself. But it doesn't mean that it's my natural state of existence just because it's something that I figured out how to do.
9 times out of 10, we're doing it until we can't anymore. I'm learning that I should bring it up sooner and advocate for myself earlier on. If an autistic person says, hey, I have this need, they're not exaggerating. It's not coming out of nowhere. They're not being fussy. They're just reaching the point where they're like, hey, I can't really mask about this anymore.
It's like that janky computer program that is lagging your laptop all of the time. But it's simultaneously the thing that's keeping your laptop running. And so it's a huge drain on the battery. It slows everything down. It makes everything harder, but it's there whether you want it or not if you want to function in society. So having the space and ability to unmask, and ideally having people in your lives that you can unmask around, is such a huge shift for autistic people. that it is both very difficult and very scary, but the payoff is that program's now shut down, and you can actually function where you could be all day, every day.
So all these things seemed extremely familiar. But I was tested and no diagnosis. That would just have to mean I just wasn't, right? I mean, I'd heard about other people figuring out themselves and self diagnosing. It was also people who just didn't have the professional resources and support that I had. So that would almost be selfish, taking away from people who have it way worse. And then one evening, I was talking with a loved one, and I bring all this stuff up, and I just wonder aloud how weird it was. All these signs, and yet I didn't meet any diagnosis. These were their next words. Oh, you did have a diagnosis. Do you want to know what it was? Yes. Huh. Well, maybe they misunderstood it. After all, it had such a vague, weird name, and it's not like they had the medical records on them. Holy fucking shit, the medical records. Why didn't I think of that? I mean, it was so long ago. I remember it'd been 25 years by that point. I don't remember the exact years. I remember the name of the hospital and the doctor that treated me, but also HIPAA wasn't in law yet, and so how much would they be able to hold on to? Thank you, Dr. Dobbs. This is the part of the show I've always felt the most conflicted about. I want to make it clear. I do not want to act like or even imply that my parents were or are bad people. They were working the best they could with the information that they were given. And really, if you tell someone that their child matches the symptoms of pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, what the fuck does that even mean? Autistic but not quite? None of the above autism? Diet autism? Same flavor, half the calories? Maybe that's what they thought it was, a not quite diagnosis. But at the end of the day, you can't have a little bit of a developmental disorder. You just have it. The symptoms just show up different. It isn't suddenly a different pseudo condition. You wouldn't say someone has diet epilepsy because they have fewer seizures, or micro dyslexia because they can unscramble the words a little faster, a little easier. That kind of confusion's why they got rid of all the different names. And since pervasive developmental disorder is autism, and the not otherwise specified was related to the not matching any of the types, once they got rid of those types, it became redundant. So when they said at the time that I had this is what I'd always had. And now, a whole new round of existential pondering on what could have been. I do not even want to pretend to imagine how my parents would have acted different, so I won't. I still think the world of them, and they will never get that kind of judgment from me. But what about teachers? How differently would they have acted if there was an IEP connected to a concrete diagnosis as opposed to an IEP to a kid who was a little bit slow, developmentally delayed. Maybe the special ed teachers could have been able to refine their approach. But what about the regular teachers? Maybe my parents kept it from them because they knew they could have reacted with stigma. If I had known about my diagnosis, maybe I could have been able to connect it with my non-visible sensory and emotional issues and properly be able to verbalize them, explain them, and figure out ways more early on how to manage them. But maybe that's just me in hindsight. Maybe I'm projecting the kind of person I am now on the child I was, thinking that I'd even begin to be able to figure out stuff like that as a kid. If I'd known about my diagnosis, maybe I could have been a little less hard on myself and just a little more patient. But then again, I could have just as easily been drawn into how it's its own distinct name. I could have been drawn to a twisted sense of superiority and use it as an excuse to brush out my more toxic behaviors and look at just other people being the problem. There are so many stories of young autistic men being drawn into dangerous communities that way, feeding off their neurodivergent insecurity. Or maybe this is just my hyperactive, abnormal brain creating its usual intrusive long-form trains of thought. The real existential funk that I went through was even more elaborate, but I will not put you through that. And more importantly, why should I put myself through that? Even if I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt back then, what then? I wasn't immune to fall into the stereotypes that were thrown around so casually. They were everywhere. Every movie and TV depiction I could ever remember was a wild, unintelligible messes with no agency. The only people who talked about autism were the parents of the classic autism variety, and how this was something that happened to them, something that took away their child, as if it were some demonic possession or alien or robot double that had taken their one sweet normal baby. So the odds are I could have reacted the way I essentially did. Be in denial. It's ironic. This is a condition where the people affected have to find a way to figure out our own voices, when at the same time, everyone else also has an opinion. And the loudest voices are almost always the worst ones. As someday it may happen that these assholes must be found, I've got a little list of the ableist offenders who are not near underground and who never would be missed. The pestilential parents who just make it all about them, with their op-eds and memoirs cashing in on their kin. The child voice ignored, going on about their own strife, and bragging about controlling every aspect of their life, insisting that it's out of love and oh how they persist. And yes, we get your gist, but we wish you would desist. And then actors love to pretend and do it for a part. You bet they're on the list. I put them on the list. How they mimic the crude stereotype is part of their repertoire. Awards they can't resist. It's why they still persist. And writers shove them in for lazy narrative need, as each has geniuses or helpless burdens of the lead. You call them out, you say you saw and see more effort took, and they snap back, insult disabled talent, real bad look. They may high and mighty that detractors don't exist. Don't let them off resist their attempts to put off this. And of course, who could forget about the former doctor's script? Andrew Wakefield's major shift from healing to bullshit. How he tried to make his own vaccine to steal the market share. Labeled MMR dangerous, said it caused autism no less. He rounded up 12 children, putting each of them through hell. Performed invasive tests on toddlers, it did not go well. Denied his studies fraud, sued his critics, failed again. Though losing doctor's license, damage done would long remain. He's now off making millions on the anti-vaxxer kit. Don't buy into his shit. Vaccine science is legit.
Everyone's a little bit autistic. That is wildly untrue. I know they mean well, and it's a way of trying to kind of normalize it and, make people feel a little bit more accepted. But because it's not true. We have more mirror neurons in our brains, and that means that we are more sensitive to the sensory world around us. There's a difference between someone who goes to a rock concert and it hurts their ears just a little bit. That same feeling could even just be someone having the TV too loud. And not only that, but and also in how often it happens and how much you have to deal with it every day.
Yeah. So for this one, a lot of times people will tell me when I say I'm autistic, they'll be like, "Oh, wow, I had no idea, or I never would have guessed." Which, I understand that they're, trying to compliment me essentially, right? But inherently in that statement is the idea that autism is a bad thing, and they don't, it's good that you don't really appear autistic, right? So, people should be rethinking the way they look at autism and not automatically assuming that it is a problem, because it's not.
When people are like, "Oh no, you're really smart for being autistic," or "You're really good at this for being autistic," just because someone's autistic doesn't mean they're dumb, stuff like that, and they can't be good at something. I get where they're coming from, but sometimes it's just, just praise me without mentioning the autism,
The response to finding out that I'm autistic and, "Oh, you don't seem autistic," or, "Oh, you don't look autistic." That is never going to be a compliment. By saying that, they are making autism a terrible thing to be.
A lot of the time I'll get, "I never would have guessed you were autistic," or you don't seem autistic, which deeply, deeply off-putting and feels really dismissive. And again, feels as though you have that instinctual negative connotation, where it's you don't seem like one of those. And the those is very much in that tone of voice, you're not like that. Which, yes, I am, and it is totally fine. And you seem more uncomfortable with it than I am.
You keep that to yourself and pat yourself on the back for keeping it down, as far as I'm concerned.
So, where from here? That's the question I keep asking on this journey. That and, Jesus, Tom, are you ever going to find a way to end the show? I'd like to say that this changed everything, but that would be a lie. Finally knowing after all this time is a huge fucking relief, to be sure. And finding this whole amazing community has also been amazing. I've also been learning more and more ways of recognizing and recognizing my little tics and managing my sensory issues. But I am also aware of the relative privilege that I have. We've gone a long way since the days of women being labeled with hysteria for anything and everything that we apparently just don't like about women. Yet a lot of people, even professionals, are still convinced that autistic women don't exist, when the symptoms just show differently, often due to societal pressures implicitly driving them to mask. And even for those that do recognize autistic women, it's weaponized against them to imply they aren't capable of anything, or that they're just being used as a prop for someone else's agenda, when really it can also be helping create their own perspective in deconstructing and seeing past the bullshit, and make them almost single-handedly inspire a whole new generation of worldwide activism. From verbal to nonverbal, there are far too many stories of Black autistic men's behavior and symptoms being labeled as aggressive, making them disproportionate victims of police violence. On the other end of that scale, other racial groups given the label model minority often are less likely to receive any sort of neurodivergent diagnosis or any access to resources due to a combination of the social pressures of meeting that insanely high reductive standard and also just assumptions from others that they just don't need the help as much. The real reason why so many of us have to self diagnose in adulthood is because the resources for autistic adults are few and far between. Barely 27% of diagnosed autistic adults have any access to social services, and privately run assistance programs cost a fortune. While denying medical care based on disability is illegal on paper in the US, it still happens. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities like Down syndrome and autism are 54% less likely to be given an evaluation for organ transplant and 62% less likely to receive one due to medical bias, even though they have identical success rates to the neurotypical population. Autism stigma is also now being used to target the transgender community, twisting the fact that there is a slightly higher percentage of gender non-conforming and transgender people who are on the autistic spectrum compared to the neurotypical population. Combine that with a twisted misunderstanding of how rigid thinking works and bad takes on how sensory issues can affect autistic kids during puberty. People have used this to create a conspiracy theory that autistic people are being brainwashed into thinking they're transgender, weaponizing these ableist ideas as a new way to deny these people the protections, rights, and healthcare that they need. Again, that is not how rigid thinking works. The studies that they cite in their conspiracy theory actually show that transgender autistic people often have less severe sensory overload issues on average, even before they transition. It's called a spectrum for a reason. I am not going to go into any sort of diatribe on how gender identity works. I just want to say this. It is not an agenda. It is not an ideology. It's not a social contagion. It's who they are. Trans rights are human rights. Get used to it. In spite of every bit of progress in the medicine, the biggest spokespeople for autistic people are nonprofits that are lucky even if they have a single autistic person on their board. They take up all the funds and the airtime to continue to peddle outdated misinformation and still stand by old documentaries where they spread vaccine conspiracies, claims that autism can and should be cured, abusive treatments, and advocating for early forms of detection and genetic screening, which is just eugenics under another name. And even the documentaries where they openly discuss about fantasizing their murdering their disabled child. They honestly think they're just being honest, and it's no harm done when the murder of autistic and disabled children by their caregivers is happening every single day. That's not just being honest, it is normalizing it. Currently, the gold standard for autistic treatment is applied behavioral analysis. And if you thought I was going to just completely rip it to pieces and call it complete junk, well, nuance is still a thing, and it is complicated. On the one hand, it is the most researched in the field and has shown some level of success. There are many wonderful practitioners who integrate educating the parents in a holistic approach that will let the child eventually have the tools they need to move past it. But there is a reason that kids and families either call it a godsend or the worst experience ever, and not much in between. Because in practice, it's how you use that analysis and what your goal is. The actual lowest level certification required needs no medical or mental health training. The only requirements is a 40-hour training period and taking a written test. Not necessarily a problem if you plan on using it in a place with higher level experts providing wisdom and ethical oversight, perhaps, but not so good if you plan on being some sort of solo provider who can wind up being overworked, underpaid, burnt out, leaving miles and miles of leeway for it to devolve into abusive practices like grueling drills and conditioning, where the only real goal is conforming and masking. Out of sight, out of mind. No real concern for the human being underneath. In short, if you are considering ABA for your autistic child, vet the shit out of any possible provider. The analysis is only the first step. It's how they plan to use that analysis. Because you might get a great team of specialists who see and care and see autistic people as human beings. Or they could just as easily wind up at the Judge Rotenberg Center. So again, what was I hoping for all this? I guess I was hoping that people would learn, that they could have their eyes opened, even to the fraction of stuff that even I was blind to. Remind them that this is something that affects them. Not just them, people that they care about. Whether you know it or not, you know somebody who is autistic. Spend a little less time listening to the fearmongers and misinformers. Spend more time listening to the people who are really affected most by this condition. The people with the actual condition. What issues do we each face? What help do we need? What gives us inspiration in real life and in fiction?
So a good example is like Leslie Knope to me is like my hero. She has all of these amazing relationships and close bonds with people, and she is successful in her, day-to-day life. But then there are those moments where she's not quite clicking socially with people, or there are the moments that you see that she's trying harder at something that other people are doing without any effort.
Emily Deschanel's character, Dr. Temperance Brennan, was a big one that I felt like I just felt drawn to her character in a lot of similarities. They'll be explained to her like, oh, you can't just speak that directly to people. And she's like, why not? And they'll be like, well, you have to make things more fluffy and you have to be softer and you have to be gentle and indirect and all this. And she's like, that seems like such a waste of time.
It's called Curious Incident of the Dog of the Nighttime, and I play the lead character named Christopher Boone. But per the author, he is autistic. So it's not really like, might be, it just is, but it's never mentioned in the show, like through text. But he's very like, he's very, he doesn't understand metaphors. He's very like straight, just like in the way he talks. He says a lot of things matter of fact, and he has trouble with just everyday things sometimes. So
one of my favorites characters who I very strongly believe is autistic is Anne of Green Gables.
I think the character Anne of Green Gables is probably autistic, and I say that because I think Lucy Maud Montgomery was likely to be autistic. I actually have some of her diaries that I've been reading through.
Her sensitivity, her vocabulary, her hyperfixations that she has.
Just the way she had a very intense response to life, and like really responded to what was going on around her in the way that she thought.
How she, escapes into her own world, how she just takes things so literally.
It tracks in a lot of ways for, autistic women. And
Rory Gilmore from the Gilmore Girls. Like a lot of autistic girls, they escape into reading and fantasy and films and fan fiction and all of and those things, and the quiet reader in the back of the room who had an unusually large vocabulary, really imaginative, very smart, but maybe not the most socially adept, a little bit awkward.
There's definitely a difference in being able to see anything that looked like me from a behavioral aspect on TV.
Being autistic is not the entirety of who we are, but it is a part of us that is just as real, as valid, and a core to making the whole of us as the color of our eyes, the color of our hair, being right or left-handed. I personally don't like to think of it as a superpower, but it's not a burden or a curse either. We aren't broken, and we don't need to be cured.
If I'd known earlier, oh, this is why I'm anxious, this is why I'm depressed, this is why I'm overwhelmed. It's, it's not out of nowhere. It does have a source. It's because I'm seeing too much or hearing too much or being around people too much and I'm overloaded. All I need to do is go off and be alone for a while, and that's going to stop.
You're going to figure it out. You're going to figure out why you always felt so different and why you always felt like there was something that you couldn't quite name. It's going to take you longer than you thought. And it's going to take a while, and you're going to have a lot of combing and sifting through. It's going to be worth it, and it's going to be probably one of the most momentous things in your life.
I mean, this is a very cliched answer, but it gets better. Right now, I'm probably the most satisfied with life that I have been in a while, but there's still things I deal with depression, stuff like that, anxiety. Just get through grade school, get through high school, and you'll be okay. College is gonna be difficult, but you're gonna become a theater major, and things are just gonna change. And also just try to, I would also tell my younger self to try to be social more. I know it's difficult, especially when you're younger, but it will really help you in the future.
It would probably be to keep asking questions, because I feel like there was definitely a point in my youth when I kept like kind of pushing at stuff, being like, this doesn't feel quite right, and like I don't feel like I'm just lazy, and don't stop asking questions. Like, you're not just being annoying, you're trying to find something that needs to be found.
There are answers, and the math will add up at some point, and that there are people, lots of people, who are understanding and supportive and care and will be accepting of you, whether you're struggling with a challenge or you're flourishing using your strengths, that see the world through maybe not exactly the same lens as you, but close to it, and can understand where you're coming from and how you got there. And it's just a matter of finding those people, and all of that will come.
How does your brain work? Asking those big questions can be daunting, but you'll find seeking out the answers with each new step in revelation. When you peak the peak of the rise, you might surmise that the way you work's not broken. Embrace your multitudes, and maybe you'll find a way to a good life. However you feel about it, wherever you are in your journey, a little patience and a little understanding goes a long way. Thank you.